Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders is one of the top quarterbacks entering the 2024 season. And unlike the 2023 season where we had Drake May and Caleb Williams as your, like, for sure number 1, number 2 guys, this season we have like 3, 4, 5 quarterbacks who could end up being the best quarterback in college football. Of course, we got Shedeur, like we mentioned, but we also got Carson Beck from Georgia, Quinn Ewers from Texas, Cam Ward from Miami, a few other guys you could talk about it and make a argument of being the top quarterback in 2024. But for this video, let's talk about Shedeur Sanders. Let's talk about what he needs to do and what needs to happen for Colorado as a team for Sanders to be considered the number 1 quarterback in college football this year. And I'm not talking about the draft or where he'll go in the draft, as I'm sure he'll be a first-round pick. But let's talk about what needs to happen. So I think Colorado as a team, I think they could have a bad season. They could struggle, and Shedeur Sanders would still be one of the top quarterbacks in the league. Regardless what you feel about Deion or Colorado, like Shedeur Sanders is a legit first-round quality quarterback going into the season. So what does he need to do to be the top quarterback? Like, what needs to happen? Well, let's look at 2023 real quick, just for a little bit. And if this is your first time tuning in, we've put out several film breakdowns of Shedeur. If you're interested, you can go back and find those, or I can link those in the descriptions below. But Shedeur Sanders, 2023, had just over 3,200 yards passing, yards per attempt were 7.5, 27 TDs, 3 picks, 4 touchdowns on the ground. And so we can address the elephant in the room first, the sacks. He was sacked 52 times. Now, I'm not sure if that led college football. If it didn't, it was damn sure up there, right? And that was a combination of mistakes. Yeah, Shedeur held on the ball too long times. I get that, and he needs to get rid of the ball, right? So you need to have schemes and an offensive system to get rid of the ball quicker. You have offensive line issues to address, and then what we just mentioned, the offensive scheme where the ball is getting out of the quarterback's hands quick. You don't have to wait for developing routes or developing plays to happen for Sanders to throw the ball. I think because you can't get much worse than that, I think you're going to be improved in that. I think the ball is going to get out of Sanders' hands quickly, right? A few things that really jumped off the page for me was his accuracy, his ability to read defenses, and his ability to take care of the ball. His interception, his TD to interception ratio was 9-1. So you want to repeat that. You want to get rid of the ball quicker, which is a big improvement area. And then you want to continue the accuracy ability that you had in 2023. Another thing I want to do for Colorado, if I'm Sanders, and something that I think could really solidify him being the best quarterback in 2024, is pushing the ball downfield a bit more. We mentioned his yards per attempt are 7.5. In his best games, his yards per attempt were above 8, and in some cases 9 and 10. So against TCU, his yards per attempt were 10.9, probably his best game of the season, right? Nebraska, 9.1. They won that game. Stanford, 8.3. Now, I know they blew a big lead, but he had a really good game and put up really big numbers. USC, 8.2. Now, they were down a lot, but he was able to generate a comeback and got them within a touchdown towards the end of the game. Against Washington State, was his only other game he was above 8 yards per attempt, but he only threw the ball 10 times in that game and got crushed. I'm not sure if that's the game that he got pulled, if he was injured, but that game was Washington State pulled away pretty early in that game. UCLA, Oregon, probably your 2 best defenses you face, yards per attempt are under 5, right? So I think more consistency in pushing the ball downfield and like the moves that they've had this offseason, new OC, new offensive system, they probably made those moves in order to help push the ball downfield. If Sanders can push the ball downfield more, if he has the time to it, if they have a system that allows him to get rid of the ball quickly, and he's able to take the next steps where he's not holding on the ball quite as long, that could really bode well for him in 2024. Another thing that was impressive, even though he had 23 completions where the ball was thrown 20 yards or more downfield, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception. So half of his completions, basically right under half of those completions were touchdowns. So I think that bodes well for Sanders. Another thing that I want to kind of touch on real quick is his ability and this may have been system, this may have been the offensive scheme, but they lived in the middle of the field. So of his 200-ish yards passing, over 2,067 were between the numbers, were middle of the field type throws. Right over 1,100 were outside the number. So he lived in the middle of the field, which was great, but I think they did enough to throw the ball outside the numbers. The defense had to adjust with that. But I would want to touch on that even more. I want the defense to have to defend the whole field on a more continued basis, on a more regular basis, than having to focus middle of the field. I think those adjustments could really help Sanders, right? So just a quick takeaways before we dive into the schedule, because I think the schedule and talking about winning games is ultimately going to be how we determine if Sanders is the number one quarterback or not. But just to kind of recap this, decrease sacks. How do you do that? Get rid of the ball quickly. And we talked about that's offensive line play, and that is the offensive system play, right? Continue to take care of the ball. Continue your accurate ability to throw. Process defenses pre-snap and post-snap, something we've talked about a lot about Sanders. And then push the ball downfield more on a consistent basis. I think those would be huge for Sanders and his development in 2024. So let's look at the schedule. Your first 5 games, or especially your first 5 games, if you can go 5-0, so you got North Dakota State, and that is by no means an easy game. They're not as good as they have been traditionally, but they're still an FCS powerhouse. So you got North Dakota State. Then you go to Nebraska. You got to have a big game against Nebraska. A win would be huge. You're probably going to be underdogs in that game, especially with the hype that Nebraska is getting preseason, and it's at Nebraska. And then you go to Fort Collins to play Colorado State. Again, that's going to be a lot of hype based off the game last year and based off needing to have overtime to beat Colorado State. Then you have Baylor at home. That's kind of your first big home game. With Baylor coming to town, I think you're going to have a win against Baylor. And then you go to UCF. So if you can be 4-0 going against UCF the end of September, that's going to be a pretty big game, especially UCF could be a better team in the Big 12. So now you have Shedeur Sanders, Colorado traveling to Orlando, their second big road test of the season, but their first big road test in the Big 12. And I think you got to go 4-1 for Colorado in this example. Now again, like I talked about, if they go 2-3 or struggle a little bit, but Sanders plays well, he could still be viewed as one of the top quarterbacks in the league, like 100%. And that's probably that would still be the case. But for him to be considered number one, I think Colorado is going to have a good season. So North Dakota State, boom. Nebraska, boom. Colorado State, Baylor at home, then UCF. That's 5 games. I think 4-1 with maybe your loss against UCF on the road. 3-2 if you lost to UCF and Nebraska on the road. I still think it is a pretty respectable record. Then you have an off game. And then you have a pretty tough schedule. You got Kansas State, who could be the best team in the Big 12, coming to Colorado. That's huge that you get them at home. And then you have Arizona, who could have the best quarterback in the Big 12, and Noah Fafita, and you go to Arizona. So big games there, right? If you have a big game against Kansas State, a big game against Arizona, regardless if you win or lose, that's huge for Sanders. Then you have Cincinnati coming to Boulder. I think you got to win that game, especially with Cincy, most likely being towards the bottom of the Big 12. After that, you have an away game, or you have an off game. Then you go with Texas Tech. That's always tough in Lubbock. End of the season, that's coin flippy type game. Again, Sanders has a big game at Texas Tech. Then you have Utah coming to home, probably the best team in the Big 12. They're the favorite to win the Big 12, probably going to have the best defense. And you want to play well against Utah. I think Sanders was hurt when they played Utah last year. I think it was the last game of the season, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Then you go to Kansas. Then you have Oklahoma State at home. So you have a schedule that you have enough quality teams that if Sanders plays well and Colorado doesn't have the season they want, let's say they go 5-7, well, he can still be talked about as the top quarterback in college football. But if they go 7-5, they go 8-4, I think that's going to be largely because of Sanders' play. And then I think it's going to be easier when you're comparing Sanders to Beck and Quinn Ewers and Dylan Gabriel and Cam Ward. I think it'd be easier for him to be talked about as being the best quarterback in college football. But this schedule, Oklahoma State right now is the 17th ranked team in the nation. Kansas is the 22nd. Utah is the 10th. Arizona is 11th. Kansas State's the 20th, right? So you got 5 teams in the top 20 starting the season off. I'm not sure if this is AP or what. I got fbschedules.com pulled up here. So I think for Sanders to really be solidified, I think you make the improvements we talked about at the beginning of the video. And if you can find a way to go 7-5, 8-4 range, or even better on this schedule, it's probably going to be because Sanders played lights out. Now, if they go 5-7, if they lose, to Kansas State, Arizona, Utah, Kansas, Oklahoma State, if they lose to the tougher teams on their schedule, but Sanders still plays well, then he can still be talked about, and it's still going to be he's still going to be mentioned as one of the top quarterbacks. But man, if they can find a way to beat some of these teams that they're going to be underdogs to, it's going to be because of Sanders, and it's going to be because of his improved play. And I think that right there would help solidify him being the top quarterback in 2024. But I want to hear from you. What do you think Sanders needs to do? Let me know in the comments below. What do you think Colorado needs to do as a team to help Sanders, take that step and be considered the top quarterback at the end of the season? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you like quarterback-specific content, that's all we talk about, especially quarterbacks in college football. So like, share, subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you next time. Peace.